I'm going to be talking on EU security and defence related matters. So this is essentially what I'm doing my PhD research on. Only a couple of months into the PhD. So I've tried to condense it as much as I can. It's a very, very complex area, but I hope I can give you a good overview of the area. Well, the aims that I sort of I hope you can take away from today, there's 5 of them, so it's in keeping with the format of the talk. So hopefully you can walk away with a better understanding of the UK's position in Europe as a military actor in the EU. It's also its contribution to EU security and defence in the past, its ambitions going forward post-Brexit, the challenges that lie ahead of it once we potentially leave the EU, and also the options for the UK, the real options in a post-Brexit world for the UK. So I'm going to try and make five key points around under this umbrella of EU and UK security and defence post-Brexit. The first one, I want to try and give you a very, very brief history of security and defence in the EU and the UK's role in it. So the EU was founded essentially on the basis of achieving peace amongst Europe's warring nations following World War II. It could probably trace the earliest beginnings of the EU, could probably be traced back to the European Coal and Steel Community of 1952. In which the coal and steel industries of 6 European nations were merged. The idea behind it was essentially that, well, coal and steel had been the industries that had fueled both world wars, and by giving by giving European nations a common interest in those industries, it would make it less likely for them to go to war, because both those industries would be for all nations' benefit. So peace, political cooperation, security and defence played a major role in the early beginnings of the EU. And many of the founding fathers were pro-federalists, open federalists, and wanted to see ever closer political union within the EU. Even Churchill even spoke about building a United States of Europe. And just as a side note, it's quite ironic that the Leave campaign used Churchill as a symbol for Brexit and for leaving the EU. I think that's quite interesting to note. But unity was key for the founding fathers of the EU, and they believed that only through unity could you achieve a real and lasting peace and prosperity for Europe's nations. And Europe's achieved that, I think. Probably the best example is France and Germany. They've gone from being probably the bitterest of enemies to the closest of allies in the past 70 years. It's probably unthinkable in 1945 that this would have happened. Whilst integration's been good and Europe has made progress, it's slowed down quite rapidly. And integration in the area of security and defence has been fairly slow. Member States have regarded any integration in this area as encroaching too much upon Member State sovereignty and as a step too far for the EU. And this has been reflected in the legal framework of the EU. Security and defence related matters remain within the full control of Europe's Member States. Any attempt towards further integration in this area, Member States have put the brakes on fairly quick, and they've been quick to hold on to their power in this area. Security and defence, just to give you a very quick background, I'm conscious of time. Security and defence policy, it's founded on unanimous decision making amongst member states, so every member state has a right to veto any action that it doesn't agree with. And the EU has got no common or independent army, so Europe relies quite heavily on its member states in order to provide personnel to its missions. And as you can imagine, trying to get 28 member states to all agree on a particular policy is very, very difficult, particularly when their foreign policies differ quite widely. This has ultimately led to the EU being a rather impotent military and political actor, and referred to amongst academics in my area as a political and military worm. And the primary obstacle to this has been the UK. The UK has consistently vetoed further integration in this area, further cooperation in this area. Whilst the EU has provided significant military support in the past, it's made significant contributions, it's been relatively low in terms of its military and defence, security and defence capabilities, and particularly in comparison to France and Germany's contributions in this area. So rather than being more of a help, it's been probably more of a hindrance to EU security and defence over the years. So we've touched on very briefly the history of security and defence of the EU and the UK's role in it. So let's just fast forward now to Brexit. We've got a very clear insight just a few weeks ago from Theresa May. She spoke at the Munich Security Conference on what she envisions a security and defence relationship with the EU to be in a post-Brexit world. She touched on two themes, internal security and external security. I don't want to deal too much with internal security. I think the more interesting bit of the talk was on external defence. May seem very keen to work the EU closely on internal affairs, so things like data sharing, European arrest warrants, and a close working relationship with Europol. May envisions quite a close working relationship between the UK and the EU in these areas. What come across in the speech was that in terms of external defence, in terms of the UK's and EU's future relationship in external defence, she didn't really make any mention of a close future partnership with the EU. She talked more about the special relationship that the UK has with the United States. She mentioned a new transatlantic partnership. She talked about Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, which is an intelligence alliance between the UK, America, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. So no real mention was really made of the EU in terms of external defence, and she explicitly stated that the UK would pursue an independent foreign policy. Not that it would run counter to the EU's foreign and defence policy, but that it would that the UK would pursue its own policy through bilateral cooperation, ad hoc groupings, and through a reformed NATO alliance. And she emphasised quite strongly the importance of UK's role in NATO going forward. So with these ambitions in mind, what major challenges does the UK face in achieving them? Well, there's two things that I just wanted to touch on. I think it's going to be key. There's two major developments which I think will be key for the UK when it's thinking about its future security and defence relationship. So the first is a potential EU defence union emerging. We're beginning to see the birth pangs of it in Europe at the moment. There appears to be an appetite for greater cooperation in security and defence. And with the UK's departure, we will now see going forward the primary obstacle, as I mentioned before, against European integration, against European cooperation in this area. It will no longer be there. So this provides Europe with a great opportunity to strengthen its security and defence capabilities going forward. And why is Europe so concerned with strengthening its security and defence? Well, ultimately, whether we like it or not, military power does correlate to political clout. And the EU has huge military potential. If the resources of all its member states were to be combined, the EU would be the second most powerful military player in the world, second only to the United States. And that's even without the UK factored into that. So I'm not advocating the use of military force to achieve your foreign policy objectives. It's just simply, it seems to be simply a fact of international relations. But we can see this beginning to take place. There is a stronger appetite for a stronger cooperation in security and defence. The most significant developments we've seen since Brexit is the signing of the new Defence Pact, PESCO, which is short for the Permanent Structured Cooperation on Security and Defence in the EU. And this is a major commitment by Europe's remaining member states to deepen their cooperation in this area. I mean, whilst member states will maintain control over this area, not much has changed in terms of the legal framework, but it's a statement of intent by the EU going forward that they want to see further cooperation, deeper cooperation in security and defence. We've also seen statements being made by Martin Schulz, the former President of the European Parliament, calling for a United States of Europe, saying that this is now Europe's opportunity to go forward and create a United States of Europe. And these are things which, even going back to when I was an undergrad and stood on my masters, that these were things which were utopian ideas. They didn't really form part of mainstream political rhetoric, but now they are. Since the UK's left, ideas like the United States of Europe are becoming more realistic. They have the potential to become a reality. So on the UK's doorstep, what we could potentially be seeing is the emergence of a new military political power. And again, this has all stemmed from the UK's decision to leave the EU. Another key development which I think the UK needs to keep in mind going forward when considering a future security and defence relationship is the presidency of Donald Trump. I say this for one key reason, really. It's just because of Trump's commitments to significantly diminish US involvement in NATO going forward. And this was a commitment made by Trump on his campaign trail, and it's something he's repeated even during his first year as president. I just want to draw your attention to the figure on the slide. As you can see, this was taken in 2015, and it shows the United States' contribution to NATO in blue. So the US contributed $650 billion to NATO. This is over half of what the other 28 member states contributed. So Trump is committed to drastically reducing this spending. And NATO could be squeezed even further. Trump's made the commitments and has called upon the other NATO members to increase their contribution to NATO from 2% GDP to 3% GDP. Yet only 5 of the 29 member states have been able to meet that target anyway. So Trump is essentially trying to squeeze NATO from both sides. And you can read for yourselves in the newspapers and online, Trump's attitude towards NATO is quite sour. He's repeatedly referred to it as obsolete and has repeatedly refused to fully endorse the Alliance's mutual defence principle, which is the bedrock of NATO, essentially. So with the emergence of Trump, confidence in NATO is being shaken. Whilst Trump has yet to make good on these commitments, there are serious doubts amongst NATO member states about whether the US will deliver in a crisis. And member states have actually would do well to begin preparing for a world in which NATO they can no longer rely on NATO for their security and defence needs. And I think this fear has played a crucial role in the EU's creation of PESCO. I think the EU is appearing willing and ready to fill any vacuum, any future vacuum that's left by NATO. So we looked at what May envisions for the UK going forward. We looked at the challenges or the 2 key challenges I feel that could impinge upon that on those ambitions. But what are the real options going forward for the UK? So I've tried to list a few key scenarios. So the first one is isolationism. I hope to God that the UK doesn't pursue this objective. I don't think it will. Not just because I think it's undesirable, I think it's impossible, but we're too dependent on our relationships with not just European member states, but with our relationship with the US, and as I said, the Five Eyes Alliance. So isolationism, I just don't think is workable. A second scenario, it could be a bilateral relationship with the United States. For me, I can only speak for myself, I don't think this is a desirable option going forward. The UK, once it's outside the EU, will be significantly weaker, both politically and militarily. And without the EU bloc to support the UK, and also to act as a fallback for the UK, any bilateral security arrangements would put Trump well within the driving seat. So the UK would become more reliant. So the UK would be a subservience in that relationship. And Tony Blair has actually mentioned recently that with the UK's role being diminished by leaving the EU, we will be more reliant on the special relationship now more than ever, and the Trump presidency more than ever. So personally, I don't think that's a very desirable objective to pursue. Another scenario, I've mentioned NATO there. I made some key points about NATO. As we've just seen, can we really rely on NATO going forward to meet our security and defence needs? If Trump does follow through with his pledges, then NATO as an alliance will be significantly weakened and depleted. And as I said, the UK will be squeezed for higher contributions to be made to NATO, which it's struggling to do already. And as I said, it's one of only 5 member states that can only just about reach that 2% GDP target already. And as we've seen, EU member states are already beginning to prepare for a world without NATO. And I think the UK would do well to start preparing in a similar manner. But where and to who would we turn to? Is the EU that potential option for us to fill that vacuum? Who knows? A final point I want to touch on. I don't really want to go into re-entering the EU. I think that's a whole talk in itself. So I don't really want to touch on that, but I'll put it there anyway, just for food for thought. Another scenario is a post-Brexit relationship with the EU, which May did touch upon in a speech at the Munich Security Conference. Now, these could take 2 forms. One form could be where the UK, we remain outside of the EU, but we still remain a part of the legal framework of the security and defence policy. So we have a say in the formulation and the direction of that policy. And we could also still participate in any military or civilian missions by the EU. But then you've got to ask yourself the question, why would the EU give the UK any say in security and defence policy when the UK is not paying any money into the pot or not contributing to the EU in other fields? Particularly, why would they give the UK any say in policy when it now has, as I've mentioned already, the greatest opportunity potentially in its history to really strengthen its security and defence capabilities? And again, sets a precedent for member states to cherry-pick their memberships. The second potential relationship, and I'm very conscious of time, I've probably gone well over what I was allowed. Second potential relationship that we might see is one in which the UK could align itself with the EU, with EU foreign security and defence policy. It could contribute to missions and receive help in return for its own missions, but it would have no say, it would have no involvement in the framework or in the formulation of policy. And again, just a point to note about that scenario. I mean, this would be a scenario in which the UK would have all the obligations placed upon it, but for none or at least not all of the benefits that could be afforded to it. So let's try and wrap up now. I've gone on for far too long. So other than remaining a part of the EU, these appear to be our options, our only real options going forward. And for me, the options just aren't good enough. We risk sidelining ourselves on the world stage, reliant on a depleted NATO alliance. We risk potentially becoming subservient to a Trump presidency in a post-Brexit bilateral security and defence pact with America. And meanwhile, all the time on our doorstep, the EU grows stronger and stronger to become potentially one of the strongest military powers in the world, under the leadership of France and Germany. And just as a side note on this emergence of the European Defence Union, I think whether you're a Eurosceptic or whether you're a Europhile, I think you should want to still be a part of this project. If you're a Eurosceptic, I think you still want to be a part of this project, so you can place some reins on security and defence policy and have some say in its makeup and its direction. As a Europhile, I mean, it goes without saying you want to be a part of it, because the EU could be at the heart of this project. It could be sat at the helm of this new project by the EU and truly become a global Britain, which is not the same global Britain that May and Johnson is talking about. But not only is it unlikely that the UK will struggle in a post-Brexit world, but I think it's going to really, really struggle to compete with states like the US, China, Russia on the world stage. And plus with the potential emergence of the EU as a potentially top military power, our noses are going to be pushed further and further down the trough when it comes to any future trade deals with the United States and other third-party states alike. But the UK militarily, yes, it is strong, but relative to the military might of these other nations, as I mentioned, America, Russia, China, the UK is a political and military dwarf, and in leaving the EU, we risk dwarfing ourselves on the world stage and drastically weakening our political clout in international affairs. There was a story in the paper today about the ex-Russian spy, I think, being poisoned, allegedly being poisoned under the orders of Putin. And what's our response? Johnson has come out today and said the UK will provide a robust response. But what is that response? So, well, we're not going to send our football team to the World Cup, to the Russian World Cup. Is that the best? Is that really the best we can do? And so be prepared that the Kremlin must be laughing the socks off at what Johnson has come out with. But be prepared for more of this. Be prepared for more of this post-Brexit of major states laughing in our faces at our inability to wield any sort of meaningful power on the world stage. But whatever happens, we will always be closely connected to Europe. And whether the Brexiteers like it or not, I'm sorry there's any Brexiteers in the room, the Henry VIII days of being cut off, broken away from Europe, are thankfully long gone. There'll always be a metaphorical and physical umbilical cord connecting the UK and Europe in almost every sense of the word. We are just too deeply integrated and dependent on each other to lose that connection. But whilst ties remain close, the UK will have, as I mentioned already, will have all the obligations, but without any say in the future direction of Europe, particularly in security and defence-related matters. But also the UK's future position in terms of security and defence depends on our choices, or the choices of our policymakers and Brexit negotiators going forward. And we can only hope that they make those decisions with our safety and the safety of our future generations in mind. I'm sorry for going on for so long, but thank you.